From ELCA Advocacy, this is Here I Pod. There's so much happening in our communities every week and every day that are impacted by policies at the local, state, and federal levels. Here I Pod will focus on one aspect of what's happening each episode by talking with faith-based advocates, as well as providing steps that you can take in your own advocacy efforts. In the first episode of Season 3, we'll hear in 3 segments about current immigration policy developments, as well as their impacts on accompaniment seen in our churches and communities. Here's Regina to get us started.
Welcome back. And this afternoon, I'm so delighted to have my friend and colleague, Mary Campbell, with me today. Mary Campbell is the director of ELCA AMMPARO. Good afternoon, Mary.
Good afternoon, Regina. So it's such a pleasure to be here.
Want to make it clear to our audience that we are having this conversation on October 7th. It's about 12 noon here in Sacramento, California. But given how quickly things are moving around us, it's just important to say this is the best of our knowledge on October the 7th, 2025. Mary, can you tell us a little bit about AMMPARO?
AMMPARO is the ELCA strategy to accompany migrants with protection, advocacy, representation, and opportunities. We're very blessed to be able to say that this strategy is almost 10 years old. Next year, we will be celebrating its 10th anniversary. And it really is the way that our church has decided to accompany migrants in this world in some very important ways: protection, advocacy, representation, and opportunities. The strategy has been able to direct our programming so that the growth has been significant over this period of time. We now have a U.S. network that has 266 congregations that are welcoming and sanctuary congregations, as well as 35 synod task forces around immigration, refugee resettlement, around AMMPARO, for a total of 59 of our 65 synods actually participating, sometimes in a multitude of different ways, in the strategy. But not only that, it's international. As a holistic whole church response, we also accompany our companions who are doing work in this world around global migration and forced displacement of peoples, which, as we know, is really at an all-time high at this moment in time. And so the growth has really been significant in terms of when now we are able to say that we have 21 companions in 17 countries around the world, including in the United States, that are actively involved in accompanying migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in their communities.
Mary, what, to the best of your ability to explain to our listeners, what's happening that makes AMMPARO so necessary right now?
I believe that we are living in a time of strategic dehumanization. And how this manifests itself here, not only in the United States, but also in Europe and all parts of the world, is that particularly here we can talk about how we have an administration that is seeking to keep people of color out of our country, and at the same time removing people of color from our country. And so this manifests itself in a variety of different ways. Just starting with perhaps with keeping people out of the country. As you can remember, the indefinite refugee ban was one of the first things that this administration made a decision to adopt. And even though it's been in the courts, and the courts have made some very important rulings to try to especially allow refugees that were already vetted and already had their tickets and were coming to the country, into the country, they've not been able to come to the country at this moment in time for the most part.
So, Mary, what are the biggest policy shifts under the current administration that affect migrants and asylum seekers?
One of the biggest policy shifts has been in the number of refugees to be resettled. The administration was expected to make a decision about how many refugees would be resettled in 2026 at the end of September. And although no number has officially come out, this administration is looking at settling at the most 7,500 refugees in the next year. and that a very significant proportion of those refugees will be Afrikaners. Not necessarily at all the people who had been in line for refugee resettlement for decades at this moment in time.
Can you explain who Afrikaners are for our listeners?
Afrikaners are white South Africans, and this coming through the refugee resettlement system would be really significant for them because they probably would not qualify for asylum were they to present an asylum claim in the United States. And they will be given preference over the many, many thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that have been waiting in refugee camps for years and have already gone through the vetting process to be able to be resettled in this world. The second significant shift has been in the way asylum has been treated. At this moment in time, we have seen, even though there are hundreds of asylum cases still pending in our court system, we have seen this administration basically fire many, many judges. Instead of hiring new judges, think about using military judges who have no experience in asylum and judging immigration cases. And the administration just recently went to the United Nations with a new proposal for how asylum should be looked at in this world to change the 1951 agreement that had been made about that. In fact, what the administration was saying was that nations should have no obligation to accept asylum seekers.
Wow.
That asylees should have no right to decide on the country of choice.
Wow.
That refugee and asylum status should be temporary. It should not be permanent. And that states should continually take a look at whether conditions might be safe for return, and that governments could make a decision that it's safe for someone to return to their country of origin. As well as saying that every country must make an agreement to accept any of the asylees or any of the refugees that would a given government would attempt to return. This is a radical change that's being proposed, and there are some governments that might be in favor of it, and so we will see exactly what will happen with that. In addition to that, this government has made a decision around mass deportation, and we've already seen evidence of how that takes place. For example, the Supreme Court has even authorized ICE to make a decision to do racial profiling. And this decision by the Supreme Court is supposed to be limited to Los Angeles and not to be implemented countrywide. But Chicago has already seen evidence, as the increased ICE presence in Chicago has been so evident, of racial profiling happening there and people being taken into custody in a variety of communities all across that city and to be deported back to countries of origin. Not only that, but there was a decision made very early by the administration for the rescission of the sensitive locations policy.
Mary, let's talk a little bit about the sensitive locations policy. I know that you're very concerned about the rescission, and there have been actions taken by Amparo and members of the network with respect to that.
Yes, it was something that had been spoken about during the campaign. During the first administration, it's really important to note that there was no rescission of the sensitive locations policy, and that gave the opportunity for people to feel more of a sense of safety in being able to send their children to school as a sensitive location, to be able to attend church or attend church activities, even community activities in churches, to be able to get treatment in hospitals. And so those were some of the locations that were protected. With the rescission of the sensitive locations policy, we have seen congregations all across the ELCA suffer a dramatic decrease in attendance as people no longer felt they could even exercise their right to freedom of religion and attend church on Sunday mornings or any other time that services were available. We have seen people afraid to go to churches now that they are no longer sensitive locations, to even be able to obtain food or necessary spiritual support, or to attend Bible study, to be able to have important events at church, such as weddings and baptisms. And as a result of that, some lawsuits have been filed. And the ELCA has a number of synods that have now already joined what is probably the fourth lawsuit around sensitive locations at this moment in time. 5 synods in the ELCA have joined this lawsuit. They are located from the East Coast to the West Coast.
California included.
Right. California is definitely included. And we have another 8 to 10 synods who are intending to join the amended complaint when it is filed. The important thing about this is that in this lawsuit, the lawyers have already asked for a preliminary injunction to prevent ICE from going on church properties. And so the preliminary injunction was requested for the entire country because it's not just the churches and the houses of worship that are listed in this lawsuit that are suffering as a result of this, but there are many, many others that are as a result of this. And so it would be of great protection if houses of worship across the country would be protected. The hope is that all of the synods, all of the congregations in those synods that are named will actually be able to say that ICE will no longer be able to come onto their properties or to disrupt their worship spaces or disrupt their programming during the pendency of this lawsuit. So it's important for us to be able to see that kind of protection so that people can really get the kind of spiritual support that they've always had. Not only that, but churches have been greatly affected as there have been some significant workplace raids, and persons who had been working in those facilities, even with long-term permanent residency or other legal status in the country, no longer feel safe being able to go to their workplaces. And so their congregations have stepped in to surround them with their love and care, and as well as making sure that they have the food that they need to survive under these very, very difficult conditions. So these are some of the things that we have seen as a result of these efforts around mass deportation.
Mary, what is the time frame on the lawsuits with respect to the sensitive locations policy?
Well, at this point in time, the preliminary injunction in the lawsuit where the 5 synods are named has already been argued, and we are expecting a decision. It could come as early as October, or it could come as late as perhaps the beginning of November at some point in time. But that will just be the preliminary injunction. How much longer the whole lawsuit will take is really is something that cannot be determined at this moment in time. But it's very important at this moment for us to see that whether or not there's going to be some protection for our congregations at this very difficult time. We have congregations who have seen their United States citizen members deported to other countries at this moment.
Oh my goodness.
In fact, one congregation saw one of a U.S. citizen member immediately deported to Tijuana, and it took that member 2 weeks to be able to come back into the country and rejoin his family. And he's not the only one that has suffered that kind of a disturbance. Many United States citizens have. So it is about racial profiling in that sense, and the lack of care in terms of status, legal status in the country.
What role do our international partnerships play? I'm thinking, for example, of the Lutheran World Federation or even our local partners in Central or South America.
One of the beautiful things about Amparo that I didn't talk about at the very beginning of this is that we have our 4 guiding principles, one of which is articulation. And what that means is that in this last 9 years, we've been able to develop a pretty solid network, particularly in the Americas, but also in the world, as our international companions are now seeing people from our country deported to them. And so one of the things that has been able to happen at this moment is that when we have seen, and we have seen this recently, where synods have reached out and congregations have reached out to say, we have a member who is in custody, who is about to be deported, and they're going back to X location. And we've been able to say, well, we have a companion there who will be able to accompany them and help them to have a softer landing than their government would ever be able to provide for them. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, we have companions that are able to make sure that they have a safe place to live, but also that they receive psychosocial trauma counseling, because once one has gone through this kind of an experience, there is a need for psychosocial trauma. It's a traumatic experience to be separated from one's family and to end up in a place that one hasn't lived in in many cases for very many years. And the other piece is also how to make ends meet. How do you find a sustainable livelihood in another country that you haven't lived in decades? And so that's where the network of Amparo has been able to do that. But it's also gone both ways, as we have seen now at our border, with more and more people being detained all of the time. We have our companion churches saying, we have a member who is now in X location and is being detained, and they are desperately in need of spiritual support and to be surrounded by a community of faith. And now with the ELCA network that we have congregations that can step in and provide that very kind of support that they need to accompany them during this traumatic period of being detained.
Mary, you mentioned that there are congregations from seaboard to seaboard who are involved in the litigation and in the advocacy in that way. What are some ways that congregations can participate in Amparo or in this strategy? And maybe thinking, yes, about the ones who are, in border contexts, but what about those that are not necessarily on the border?
Well, we know now that we have migrants and communities across our country. There are rural areas where people are saying we would not even have a rural economy in our small town if we did not have migrants there. We would not have schools that would be operating because we would not have enough children in this community in order to have a school. And so we have people across the country that are connected in migrant communities. What we always tell congregations when they join the Amparo network, which is important to join because it gives you the national and international perspective as well as the local perspective, is that you should look at what migrant community organizations are doing in your place and support the work that they are doing, because they are connected and they know what needs to happen. A really beautiful example of where that happened was Southeast Minnesota. There was a congregation that really wanted to connect to the migrant community that was in their community, but really didn't know how they could do it. They felt there was a language barrier. And so they were able to find a community leader that was bilingual and build confidence with that person to the point where then they were able to accompany that community in some new and very exciting ways. And especially, it's a call for everyone at this moment in time. If you're living in a community and there are migrants that are with you, the most important thing is to let people know that you're there, that you don't need to ask them for their stories. Just being able to say, I see you, and I want you to know that I care that you are here, and that I know this is a frightening time, but I care that you're in this community. And if there are ways that I can accompany you, I would like to be able to do that.
For individual listeners who feel just overwhelmed or far removed from what you've just spoken about, what is one concrete action that they can take this week that can help move the needle?
One would be to join ELCA Advocacy, because that way you will see how you can make your voice heard. And one of the things that we have been suggesting, and we're suggesting all summer, is that people reach out to their congressional representatives to visit detention centers. We see a growing number of people being detained at this moment in time, and having congressional oversight on detention centers is really important at this moment. I think that's happened in California, and I know it's happened in Colorado as well. And in fact, in Colorado, at first, the congressional representative wasn't even being given the opportunity to enter, but was persistent about it and was able to do that. So those are things that individuals can do to try to change conditions for others, especially at this moment in time.
Mary, in your work, where have you seen the gospel recently?
I see the gospel every time I have a phone call where a church kind of contacts me to say, we have this family in our community and we want to see how we can better accompany them. And we're looking, can you give us a little help with this or that? Or here's our question. Where can we look for the right resources? And that inspires me every day to know that people are willing to walk with each other at this moment and make the gospel real, and live their faith in new ways.
Mary Campbell, Director of ELCA AMPARO, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Before we hear from a pastor at the U.S.-Mexico border, here's a word about refugees and policy.
My name is Kate Parsons, and I'm on ELCA's advocacy staff covering migration policy. ELCA is a church that's home to immigrants, that has historic roots in immigrant churches, that's based in a nation of immigrants. So we're really familiar with the many different reasons why someone might choose to migrate. And many of us have these reflected in our own family histories. People might be seeking economic opportunities. They might be looking to reunite with their families who are deeply rooted here. But I think in this time, it's particularly important to share stories of people who are migrating because they don't have a choice. They're migrating to flee violence, to flee insecurity, to flee persecution based on who they are or what they believe. That sort of immigration has a legal pathway. US law allows people who meet the definition of a refugee, and that means they're unable to return to their home because they have a well-founded fear of persecution because of who they are or because of what they believe. People who meet that definition have the right to seek asylum in the United States. And historically, that's been a really beautiful way that the US has upheld its legacy as a country that has welcomed people fleeing violence. There are churches and organizations in Latin America who are welcoming and serving migrants, but they can meet just a fraction of that need. This year, the United States is not even letting people make the case for asylum. That means that there's thousands of people who have fled places like Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, even Palestine, who are waiting in Mexico just below the southern border to see if they will have a chance to make their case. Right now, we're seeing a perfect storm. The United States used to fund programs that addressed some of the root causes of migration, the reason why people might be forced to leave, but almost all of that funding was abruptly ended in January. That means more people are needing to leave at the same time as this access that they had is being shut off. And so people are trapped in Central America and Mexico without any place to go. The United States has previously vetted, approved, welcomed refugees and asylum seekers who made our country and our worshiping communities their home and made our communities stronger for it. Restarting the process to hear the cases of people who are seeking safety in our country is going to make our entire country and our communities stronger.
And now a reflection from Pastor Manuel Retamoza, co-pastor of St. Andrew's Lutheran in San Diego. He joins us in his pastoral call to the worship site of the Border Church, an interdenominational Christian ministry that gathers on either side of the border between the United States and Mexico. To see the site referenced in his comments, view this episode on our YouTube channel.
Manuel Retamoza. I'm a pastor here in San Diego at St. Andrew's Lutheran, but I'm also the pastor here at the Border Church at the Wall here with Baja California or Tijuana. I'm going to show you a little bit about the Wall here. As you look to the east, looking across the border, you can see the Wall snaking up. That neighborhood you see is Colonia de Libertad. It's the neighborhood my father was born in several decades ago. We'll flip back around the other way and look west up the Wall. You can see that way. Off in the distance, you can see the Border Patrol cars up there, telescopes and all their surveillance on that tower up there. Just to the left of where you're looking, you can see the gate. This is the Whiskey 8 gate. It's the Western 8th gate that we have here. And you'll come back to me now, to my face. We'll walk up a little closer here. This is our altar. We have worship every Sunday here. Worship changes, and it has changed even over the last year. A year ago, When we were worshiping here in the afternoon, if you looked through the fence before this razor wire was here, where there were hundreds of migrants that were being detained between the walls. And we would be able to worship with them, serving them the bread and the wine, or the grape juice through the wall here. They would be out here for hours or days, some single people, but also some families as well. And the families would wait out here for hours or days overnight. We would give them these foil blankets, also give them if they needed some medical care, we were able to give them some medical care as well out here. Provide them with some food, some hot water to make coffee or hot chocolate, top ramen to help feed them out here. This gate here was used at that time, this Whiskey 8 gate. A charter bus would show up, and that gate would open, and they would take the men first and load that bus. That bus would take off, and they would leave the women and children. And the reason they would do that is because they saw the men as more of a threat than the women and children. I will share also that at this space here, the individuals that we see, the families that we'd see, spoke many languages from all over the world. And so we provided them. I'm going to have you passed over here for a moment. They were provided with these sheets who would kind of share their rights with them, and every color is a different language. The other thing that I want to highlight too is that it wasn't just the dominant languages that we know of that they spoke. They also spoke native language, our indigenous languages. We are here on the Kumeyaay land that is divided by this wall. The tribe itself is divided by this wall. But there were other indigenous languages that were spoken here from Mexico, but also from Central America that were spoken. And so we were able to provide assistance out here at that time, but that has all stopped. That stopped shortly after November 6th, as that administration came into power. February 15th was about the last time we saw a woman that was being detained between the walls. Since then, it has stopped. The immigration that was happening, also with even in Tijuana at our shelters that many of the shelters that we, as the Lutheran Church, assist with work down there, those shelters have been emptied out as people have decided they're not coming across, or they went back home, or they found work and a way to live in Tijuana. The last piece I'll share with you, I know people think about Tijuana as a small city. It is a city of 5 million people. It has been growing by 100,000 people every year for over the last 15 years and continues to grow. And that's partly due to our broken immigration system that traps people here in Tijuana. And so the work that the church does through Global Refuge, through Amparo, helps provide assistance to those who have no place else to go and have to remain here in Tijuana, but also for those who are on this side as well. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share this space with you at the Border Church and our altar, but also thank you for sharing these words and for your continued assistance in the work that we could do as the Lutheran Church.
Our thanks to guests Mary Campbell, Kate Parsons, and Pastor Manuel Retamoza for their contributions to today's episode. If you want to learn more about how to get involved in the work of Amparo, visit elca.org/AMMPARO. You can also visit elca.org/advocacy to join our advocacy network, where you will receive updates about relevant action alerts direct to your inbox. We currently have an action alert in support of welcoming refugees. A direct link to this alert can be found in the show notes for this episode. This concludes this episode of Here I Pod. If you want to contact us, You can email us over at elcaadvocacypodcast@elca.org or leave us a voicemail at 866-740-3522. Thank you for listening.